I'm Alexander Verbeek, a freelance journalist, and I'm passionate about preserving the environment. This summer, I walked the Camino de Santiago to better understand the impact of climate change along this historical route. While walking the Camino near Palas del Rey, as well as near Pamplona, I twice experienced the impact of wildfires. When I did the Camino last year, I had to travel nearly 100 kilometers per bus to Logroño before the authorities considered it safe enough to continue walking. It seems these record-breaking hot and dry summers, which are catalysts for wildfires, are here to stay. And that brought me here to this beautiful park, very close to the head office of Swiss Re in Zurich, Switzerland. And I'm about to interview Tamara Soyka. She is the Head of Cat Perils for Europe and Middle East and Africa. And the main question I want to ask her is, all these changes that we're seeing, is that just climate change, or is there much more that we should know about? When I was walking the Camino in northern Spain, there were massive heat waves. Two of them, 40 degrees, just when I was climbing the highest hills on the route. So that was kind of challenging, and I solved it by getting up really, really early. So people adapt, right? That's a good example. But I was wondering, on things like extreme weather and heat waves, how is this impacting your work?
I mean, more extreme weather means in the end then also more extreme events. Yeah. And we see nat cat losses rising 5 to 7% every year for decades. Like if you look at the statistics, it's like 30 years that this 5 to 7% annually it is growing.
So nat cat is natural catastrophe?
Natural catastrophe. Okay. Losses are rising at that speed, exactly. And of course, this is also triggered, more heat, more moist in the air, more extreme events, more severe. This is a cycle that is natural.
So more moist in the air, that also means more downpours?
Downpours, more heavy downpours, but then we also are expecting more droughts. That's something that we can, especially in Europe, we are expecting that this will happen in some areas of the continent.
Is this all climate change that we are seeing?
Well, climate change is everywhere, but not everything that we see is climate change. There are other very important drivers, macro trend drivers, I also like to mention. So the one standing out is urbanization and asset concentration. And maybe I can bring you an example. If you look at Hurricane Ian last year and think a bit what happened there. So the US population over the last 50 years grew by 60%. Let's focus on Florida. Florida's population over the last 50 years grew more than 200%. And now if you look at that area, so the landfall that Ian made, in that area, we have so many houses and so much, was built over the last 50 years. The population grew by more than 600%. So here is an example of why urbanization matters so much, and even more than climate change, in terms of, why our natural catastrophe losses are actually increasing 5 to 7% per annum for the last 3 decades.
So, if I get it correctly, climate change is a huge problem, but it's especially a big problem if people decide to start to live exactly there where it's kind of obvious that climate change is going to play out. So that is something we should take into the whole equation as well.
I think so too. So land use regulations is very important, plays an important role, and I think it has been ignoring the natural catastrophe risk in many parts of the world over the last decades, and I think this is important.
So building houses right there where you know that flooding is going to take place is not a good idea. Starting to live in places where you think the deserts are coming back because there's not enough water in the future, those are the kind of things we should be aware of. So that asks governments to play a role in the planning as well. Maybe it should be reflected in the prices too, right?
Yes, exactly. So it needs to be reflected in the prices. Prices need to internalize all the external costs, also the environmental costs, obviously, and insurance plays an important role in this equation too. And obviously the risk we take into our books need to be reflected adequately in the price.
Yeah. We spoke about impact of heat, we spoke of impact of wildfires, and if you combine those two, what you saw in, let's say, a place like Lytton in British Columbia in Canada last year, or what you saw in Australia the year before, is that there's often first heat, and therefore droughts, and therefore you get the wildfires. And then the next phase is that by the time you get this more humid air that you mentioned, drops huge amount of water, the ground has become so dry and the trees that normally absorb the water are gone. So then you get a flooding because the water quickly goes down. Is that something that you're dealing with as well at Swiss Re?
Yes, we have different perils. You mentioned wildfire, you mentioned heavy rain, pluvial rain, and a few others. So in that context, I think we have to see like climate change influences us a lot, but we have confidences which are different depending on the peril. So what we can say is, yes, for example, in Europe, in the north, we expect more rain. In the south, we expect more drought. These are things where we feel, there is a confidence, especially on the rain side. If we turn to, let's say, hail, severe convective storm, in other words, that's less proven. In terms of what science says here on the climate change part, we are less confident this will change, and even lesser so on winter storm, for example, in Europe, which is a very important peril, a primary peril. Here we have also natural variability. So, we have turns around cycles where you have heightened severity of events or more events, and then you have periods with lesser. That's naturally like that. That's what we call natural variability. And here we are less confident that climate change actually matters a lot. So certainly on flood and on fire weather, we see that this is increasing.
I wonder, how does that work we're here in this park very close to the Swiss Re headquarters. How do you work internally with, you have so many experts. You have experts on climate and on risk and on the finance, etc. How does that work in a team? Can you explain that in a few words, how you work together with all that expertise?
Sure. So at Swiss Re, we have about 45 plus experts in the area of natural catastrophe. We actually build our own models. We have our own internal risk view, and that makes us somewhat independent. And certainly we built our expertise around, the different perils, but also then in the different regions we have more, different perils which are dominant. So we adjust our work and we work very closely with our business where actually the risks are assessed. So this closeness and close interaction is a very important part.
Yeah, and I knew Swiss Re long before I got to know it as a company. I already knew it as a thought leader, as for me, the very first company I remember that actually warned by looking at natural catastrophes that those that are related to climate were growing much faster than the natural catastrophes like earthquakes that are also growing because there are more buildings now than longer ago, but that there wasn't like an exponential growth in climate change related catastrophes. And that made it for me the first company I remember that I was in public speeches referring to as a company that was really leading in this point in changing the opinion, and as a company instead of as an NGO pleading for action on climate change. And I think that was a brave step of Swiss Re to be so early.
Yeah, no, it's surely it is key for us to understand climate change risks and risks around natural catastrophe. That's where we are, where our expertise sits, and it's important to actually mitigate those risks, to really understand them first, and then you can take the mitigating action.
And is it fair to say that on a rapidly changing planet, we want businesses to rapidly change as well, to reflect those new circumstances? And if they want to be able to keep investing in new technology and in new solutions, that they therefore need to manage their risk in a different way, and therefore they need the best risk experts in the world?
I think there are 4 things that I can point out, which I think is very important. Yes, first of all, you have to build these sustainable businesses. You have to probably convince competitors to join you in that effort to be really sustainable.
Yeah.
And you have to convince investors that this is the right thing to do. And then you need to have governments that put the right frame around it, that it can work.
So that's basically the central word here is we can do it, but we have to do it together. You need the businesses, you need the investors, you need the reinsurance, and you need also the governments, probably the individuals, I guess. So you need everybody on board to deal with the new challenges, and then we can be hopeful for a new future?
I think only then.
Only then. So these are important conditions. Thank you so much.